Alright guys, in this video we are going to set up a couple more components and just kind of review what we did. So we already created a game input class for us to be able to deal with touch and all kinds of different gestures. We implemented a body component, which it's just a data bag just holding the body and if it's dead or not with getters and setters. And we have a type component where we can state the type of the player using our helper class, which is just holding the different types of entities that we want to create for now. Okay, so the next component that we should create, so we got a body, and before when we were doing Box 2D, we had them colliding with each other where we would choose what the type of collision is. So we're going to add a component for doing collision and have it be a little bit more robust so we can have an entire system that is going to control how the player or entities interact with each other. So we'll call this one collision component, and we want to implement a component from the Ashley entity, and we want to implement the poolable interface. Okay, so now let's implement the methods. Okay, so for our collision component, really what we want to hold is private an entity that we collided with. So let's just call it collided entity, and then we need to import. Okay, so the idea is that the entity that has this component, we can have it set to not have anything that it collides with, but once it does, we want information to be put here of what it collided with so we can decide what happened. So if the entity that has the collision component is the player and it collides with an enemy, we want the enemy to be filled in, initialized into this collided entity so that we can have a system to say, well, if it hit an enemy, then this is what I want to do. Okay, so we need to have getters and setters for that, so let's go ahead and implement some getters and setters. Bam, that's done. And for our reset, when we are putting it back in the pool, we want to reset the collided entity back to empty. We don't want to keep that information in there, otherwise it's going to act like it still was colliding. Okay, so we have a collision component. We can now go back to our entity manager. Let me close some of these. We can go back to our entity manager, and let's create another method for adding a collision component. So let's do private entity add collision component, and we know we're going to need an entity to pass in. Do we need anything else? I think that's all that we need. Okay, so we have to create the collision component. Let's just call it collision component, and we're using the engine to do it. So create component of the collision component class, and we're going to add it just like what we did with our body. Entity.add, we're just going to add it. So it's not holding any information when it's created. Entity.add collision component, and then we are returning that entity. Return entity. That should be it, right? Yep. Okay. Easy enough. Now we just got to plug this in. So we have a body, we have a type. Let's add the collision component. We pass in the entity. So when we get into the player, it's going to add these components, come back, it's going to add the entity to the engine, and then it's going to return that entity with all those things put in already. Yes. Okay. Next thing that we would want to do, we have a collision component. Let's go ahead and do a player component. The player component, we could eventually have it hold information, but for now it would be a way that we can identify from our entities which one's the player. So we'll just leave it as that. So it's going to implement component and poolable. Implement the methods. Right now it's not doing anything, so we're just going to leave it like that. But in our entity manager, private entity add player component entity and player component. Let the engine create it. Class. Okay, so we created it. We add it to the entity. We return it. So right now, it's really kind of just acting like a flag, letting me know when we set up a system that I can look for anything that has a player component attached to it, any entity that has a player component attached to it. That's what I could do work on in the systems. So this will make it so it's ultimately easier for doing controls when I only want the controls to be applied to a certain entity. So if I wanted to change how, instead of controlling a player, I wanted to control an enemy, all I would have to do is just add that player component, and that would be what the player could control. And that is done. Now, we could add, let's just call it state component. I'm going to implement interfaces this way. So component, component, and the poolable. Well, let me do it that way. Part of it. Okay, so for our state component, what we ultimately want to do is we want to basically lock in what type of movements we want to deal with. So in my game, I had some enums that I created. And I may end up changing this, but all an enum is just the options of what you can have. So I had a direction that my entity was facing. So, and I'm going to put them all in caps: up, down, left, right, and none. Or let's say stationary. Okay, so my player is either always going to be facing up, down, left, right, or actually let me change that back to none. None. And then I also have an enum in here for what state the player is in if he was up, down, left, right. Direction. Okay. So my player could be idle. He could be moving if he was moving left, right, up, or down. He could be talking. Let's see. He could be attacking. He could be getting hit. He could be just prepping everything. Preparing to attack. To attack. Let's see. And I guess we could put immobile if maybe he's like frozen. Immobile. And he could be dying. Trying to think in general terms of what any entity that I have created could be doing. If I needed to add additional functionality, I could add more states. So those would be my enums. Now I'm keeping them public so that I can access them and then change states based off of this. But I am going to have a private state that entity, once I attach it, will have, and a private direction that the entity will have. It helps if I type it right. Direction, there we go. Okay, so now I need getters and setters for my state and my direction. Bam, got those. So now I can set the state, I can get the state. If I need a reset, I need my state to be back to null, and I would need my direction to be back to null. So then we go back to Entity Manager, and let's add another method for that. Private entity. Once you start building these, they start to feel like they're all kind of designed the same. It's really the systems that are changing everything. State component. I need an entity. Okay, once I have my entity, state component equals engine dot create component state component. Oh. Okay, so now this would the states would depend on what entity we have. So we will probably want to pass in this string for the entity name. Okay, so we'll do another switch inside of here. Switch entity name and case for the player would be that his state component dot set direction, let's say, is down. So typing that all in caps so I can get that enum right there. And his direction, so state component dot set direction, would be his, let's just say idle. Why do you not like that? Guess I'll actually component dot state dot, let's make them idle. Why? Oops, I did set direction. That's why. That's dumb. State. And we're good. Okay, break out of that. Entity.add state component and return entity. Okay, so we now have a method set up, so if my enemies, I want them to start a certain way, I can do that for all of my enemies. So now we need to add state component, we need the entity, and we need the entity name. All right. We could also do one more component for now, and then I think we'd be ready to kick off on this. We're going to do a transform component, and all that this one's going to do is basically going to be holding our position, and that way we can link to it on putting like our graphics and stuff on there. Poolable. Let's implement those methods. So our transform component, oh, you know what? I forgot something. State component, we do actually want to add another piece. For our I'll leave that for now. Transform component, we want it to basically hold our position, and if we want to resize anything, rotate, if we want our stuff to hide, this is all stuff that we could add in there. So let's go ahead and create a couple variables, private, and let's do a vector 3 for the position. And the reason why I'm going to do it this way, even though we're dealing with just 2D, is that I want to use, so we have X, Y, and Z. I want to use Z, since we're looking two-dimensional, as my rendering order. I ultimately want to have like if I'm destroying something and then I want to walk over the rubble instead of walking behind it, I want to be able to change that on the fly in the game. So let's do vector 3 position, and we'll do a new vector 3, and we want a private vector 2. This is going to be what's going to be holding our scale. So 1F and 1F, that's basically our normal scale, so it's not skewed at all on the sides, but then we can change things if we want to. Maybe when he's getting attacked, or they get a power up and he gets bigger, we could deal with it. Rotation, we could deal with that. I don't have rotation in my game, but it's not bad to have. Rotation equal to 0.0f, and let's do private Boolean is hidden. Or yeah, we'll start that out as false. Okay. So when we want to reset, we basically want to reset everything back to it. So let's do position equals or do you not like it? Vector 3. There we go. Okay, and vector 2, so our scale is going to be back to vector 2, 1F, 1F. You just don't like that, do you? Scale dot x is equal to 1F. Scale dot y is equal to 1F. Okay. Rotation is equal to 0F. And is hidden is equal to false. Okay, so we got that stuff reset. And they're all private, so we gotta do our getters and setters. Okay. So we can set initial position. We can have systems that are initially doing that. Depending on how we want to design it, we could have where we are setting the position and the body's getting created based off the position, or the position is getting based off, set based off of where we're putting the bodies. Either one would work. We just got to be consistent. That would be all of the components that I think that we would really need to set up to get the stuff. The next piece that we're going to do is systems. So I'm going to have a separate video for each system that we're going to start doing. All right.